welcome you. I'm Natalie Benamou. I am the founder and creator of HerCsuite. And it is such a thrill to have you here today to hear from two amazing experts in the board realm. And we have exclusive interview series started by Naomi Kent, our HerCsuite board's chair. And today's guest is Pat Hedley. She's the founder and CEO of The Path Ahead. She's an advisor, a board member, investor, author of Meet 100 People. She's also done a TEDx talk. I had her on HerCsuite Radio, so you're welcome to listen to that interview. She is a former managing director at General Atlantic, and she has served on boards. She's helped boards find board candidates. She's placed women on boards and done so many things in the board space, as well as serving on corporate boards and as an advisor and investor. And today's session is going to be moderated by Naomi Kent, who many of you know. She invited many of you here today, so I'm thrilled that you know her. But she's, in addition to being our board's chair, she has a long history of serving on boards, leading organizations, helping people become board ready. For those of you that aren't familiar with HerCsuite, I'm going to share just briefly what we do and who we are. Our organization helps you gain a competitive advantage by engaging top talent with 3 different types of programs. We do turnkey speaker events for organizations. We offer leadership development, both in mentorship and executive development for women. Our turnkey speaker events are for men and women, I should add. And our special programs like HerCsuite Boards. We started HerCsuite Boards because I was getting a lot of questions about who do you know that's board ready? And it turns out that being board ready isn't what you might think. It's not just a resume. It's also about connections. Before we started today, we were talking about the importance of connections. And I know Pat's going to share about that in a minute, but I was getting a lot of questions. Who do you know? And so we formed HerCsuite Boards to help, in a way, to help accelerate opportunities to land the next board role in a diverse board opportunity. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Naomi Kent, who is going to start this off and provide so many wonderful, wonderful questions for Pat Hedley. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you, Natalie. Thanks very much. Well, Pat, thank you for joining us. So we've heard a little bit about your background. You've served on boards. You've been an investor. We mentioned there that you've helped recruit directors to companies. So what are the qualifications that you believe a potential board member needs to possess?
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. Really appreciate the opportunity. Yes, there are a number of qualifications that I think are important and relevant to serving on boards. I think one very important one is to have financial acumen. Part of being on a board is representing shareholders. And so you need to be able to understand the language, the financial language that a company tells. And so having an understanding for what to look for, what financial statements look like, what are the right questions to ask when determining what the prospects are for a company, I think is very important. I think it's also important to have some experience or understanding of governance, because that is the role certainly that you play as a public company director, but it's also incredibly important for private companies as well. And governance is providing oversight, it's understanding those specific items which a board has to make decisions on. And those decisions have to do with financing and capital, compensation, strategic planning, organizational structure, and certainly being able to advise, and in some instances and often evaluate the CEO who does report to the board. I think it's important to have some level of pattern recognition. I think as we become experienced at whatever we do, that is a capability that we develop. Obviously, the more people we meet, the more we can recognize what good looks like. And I think pattern recognition, or having seen this before, is something that's really essential at a board level, because companies face problems, they face unusual circumstances, and the CEO will look to the board and say, have you seen this before? How can you help me with it? What should we do? I also think it's really important to have access to resources. And by resources, I mean this broadly. Expertise, others who can be helpful, but also a network of connections and people who can give you the answer quickly. It's wonderful to be able to make one phone call to the right person as opposed to having to make 3 or 4 phone calls to get to that right person. And the broader your network, the more people you know, the more you can provide that. I think those are kind of the foundational characteristics that a board member should possess.
Wonderful. Very helpful. Thank you, Pat. And for a lot of people who are on the call today, I'd say most people have served on a nonprofit board of some kind. And usually that's one of the first boards that I hear people saying they've joined. How can serving on nonprofit boards be helpful if you also want to serve on for-profit boards, or if you're doing it as a combination, like a portfolio of boards?
I think serving on a nonprofit board can be very helpful in a number of ways. First of all, I would not join a nonprofit board unless you cared about what the organization was involved in. So I would put that as kind of a foundational criteria. But I do think that serving on a nonprofit board exposes you to the opportunity to be part of a governance structure, to be able to advise whoever the executive director or founder is of that organization, and also to work in collaboration with others to solve problems. And in fact, that is what you do on a nonprofit board, and you also do that on a for-profit board. I think there's one other aspect that people don't fully appreciate in serving on nonprofit boards, and that is that the other people with whom you serve then become part of your network. And if it is a board where these individuals are perhaps serving on private or public company boards, they can be excellent people to know, not just to learn from them, but also to potentially surface opportunities that might be valuable to you. I know that my nonprofit work actually led to a very specific advisory opportunity that I was made aware of years after the fact. And I know that in many instances, serving on nonprofit boards gives people the exposure to people who could be incredibly helpful to them in their careers, their professional lives, and potentially in board opportunities as well.
I think really the message is the cause is important, has to be something that's close to you, something that's relevant to your brand. But then it also sounds like you want to evaluate the people, right, that are on that board too. You want to be surrounded by people that are going to help you grow, and people who are peers. Now, I think a lot of people are very determined to get onto boards, and there's a lot of people saying that they want to get onto boards. What do you think holds people back from being able to serve on boards? What are some of the things that you saw during your career?
I think that's an excellent question. And I think probably one of the most basic things that hold people back is saying you want to be on a board is not quite enough. A lot of people want to be on boards without really knowing what that means or understanding what company could they be relevant to, what could they do. And in fact, somebody asked me this question once, and I thought it was an incredibly important question. If you could serve on any public board, which would it be, or which ones would it be? And I tell you, most people, when asked that question, hesitate. They don't know immediately what that might even look like. And frankly, if you can't paint the picture of what that would look like, you haven't given it enough thought. You haven't thought about, okay, if it could be anything at all, first of all, what would I get excited about? Second of all, what would be relevant to my background and experience where I could really be additive? And then third of all, very importantly, if you can identify those things, what is the path that will get me there? Who else do I know on that company's board? What second or third degree connections do I have on LinkedIn that could lead me to conversations that might lead me to that board? And I will tell you, of the individuals I know who've been very successful in going from 0 boards to a handful of boards, 4 or 5 boards, they have been extremely intentional and thoughtful about what they want and how they're going to get there. They actually went through the process of thinking, this is my skill set. These are the companies or industries or areas where there is relevance and a match. This is the small subset of companies that fall into that category, call it 10 or a dozen. And how do I get from here to there? And I think this very proactive, specific planning yields success. Because the opposite of that is just saying, I'd like to be on a board and really not having any direction. You almost have to fast forward yourself 3 to 5 years from now. And if you are successful in this effort, where will you be? Project that out, work yourself backward. And even if you don't get exactly to your favorite company board, if your aspirations are that high, I say shoot for those aspirations, because you will find something along the path that will satisfy what you're really looking for and what matches with your strengths and capabilities.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people who treat the board search like a job search, and I think it's very different, right? There are so many unique ways, and like you said, you can't just go out asking and saying you want to get on a board. It's just like saying, "Hey, I want a job." Right? Like, what kind of job? Where do you want to work? What do you want to do? But that's easy for most of us because we have the history. Boards, it's slightly different, right? And I think you're absolutely right. I've seen the same thing. So for everyone here on the call, definitely think about your plan. And actually, at our next HerCsuite boards meeting, we're actually going to be talking to that exact point, which is, where do you want to go? What are the types of boards that are right for you?
Right. And be intentional, really be intentional. I mean, if you can't articulate it, you're going to have a hard time achieving it. And frankly, in some ways, it is like, being very proactive about a job. You have to figure out who's going to help you get there, who's part of your network. Are there any areas that you need to learn or improve in your own personal, experience base that can help you along the way? And then tell people, because if you just want to get on a board and you haven't told people, it's not going to happen. Tell the people that make it known that you're interested in boards and why, and what you bring to the table that is distinctive and unique and can be incredibly helpful and valuable for this company.
Now, during your career, part of your role at GA was to bring people onto boards, right, and to interview them. And obviously, I'm sure you heard stories of successful and unsuccessful board directors along the way. You've met so many board directors, and obviously you've worked with them as well. What are the common kind of characteristics or qualities that they share that you can sort of advise and help with us today?
Well, let me tell you, from a board's perspective, and certainly from an investor's perspective, the single most important thing that you're trying to solve for is to get a high quality person that you can trust. You're really trying to solve for trust. And so it's not a surprise that people go out to their own networks to find individuals to add to boards. They go out to their own networks because, you know what, when they do, they'll find somebody that they know, they've had experience with, and either that person is an appropriate candidate or they know someone, and then you get that connection from a trusted source. So I think it's super important to think about that. When you understand that, it is no surprise that there are certain individuals who get asked multiple times to be on multiple boards. If somebody brings audit committee expertise and was a former CFO with a company that an investor knew well, what a surprise that he gets asked once or twice or, to serve on 3 different boards. So that's an important piece of it. The second piece is to think about the network. So if you're not a part of that network, how do you become part of that network? How do you figure out who to know, to get to know over some period of time, where you can establish that trust, where they know who you are, they know what you've done, you have some experience with them, and that helps further your case. And if in fact you could do some work or provide information, guidance, be generous with your own networks, provide help to those companies, that gets you farther along too. I will tell you, if someone came in and said, look, I have experience in this area, I've done competitive analysis, I know these are the couple of things that are really important to this company, can we have a conversation? That's a very different conversation and outreach than if somebody just says, I'd like to meet you, this is my background. There has to be a little bit more of an effort to do that. I will tell you that at my firm, one of the things that I also discovered, not a surprise, is that, some people have overlapping networks, other people have very distinctive networks. I know that I added to my firm's overall network because I had a really deep network of female executives that my male colleagues didn't have. And when that was the case, it was my responsibility to make sure that I would propose some of those individuals. And I'll, share a no names situation here where I did propose an individual. I had forwarded this individual's resume. It was an incredibly impressive resume, and I never heard back. And my male colleague said, I called him and I said, well, what about this individual? And he said, well, I'm not so sure. I said, on my reputation, meet with this person. And he did. And she joined the board. And I think sometimes you have to advocate for people strenuously. And the fact that I was trusted by my colleague, allowed me to say on my reputation, meet with her. And the other piece that's really important is you actually do have to meet people either in real life or virtually. In real life surely is a winner. It makes such a huge difference. If there's an opportunity and somebody says we can have a virtual call or a coffee or lunch, take the coffee or lunch. Meet with people in person. It just is a different level of conversation. Look, if you're geographical issues are in play, timing is of play, getting on a virtual call sooner as opposed to later is much better. So I'm a huge fan of that. But if you can, if it's indifference and it's just traveling to some place that's not too inconvenient, try to make it in person because it really matters a lot.
I think what I'm also hearing here, Pat, is, you're obviously, when we're looking for boards, we're out there talking to people and hoping that we're going to get some help and some assistance. But it also sounds like you should be the reverse too. You should be out there. Each person should be out there looking to recommend others to boards as well, right? Like it's almost part of being in the network of helping others too, right?
I can't underline that more. I so agree with that. I believe, and not a surprise, I wrote a book called Meet 100 People. I'm a huge believer in the value of networks. I think there's so many reasons to network, and it's not just to have more opportunities. It's to learn, it's to recognize what good looks like, but it's for another reason that I think most people don't think about. And that is so that you can be a gift giver. And by giving gifts, I mean introducing two people to one another. And the more people you know, the more gifts you can give. But you also have to be mindful and thoughtful of who are the people that you want to bring together. And when I have conversations with people, I actually think about that. When I have conversations with someone and I learn what they need, what they might require. In the back of my mind, I'm kind of searching my own internal database and thinking, you ought to meet this person. I know if I connect these two people, something special will happen. And I've done it so often now. And the people that know me know that I don't do this without some thought and consideration, that it is hugely valuable. And I very recently introduced someone to a potential board candidate, and I knew that it was going to work. My background, my pattern recognition, my experience, everything I knew about these two people meeting together, I knew would result in something positive. The more you can do that, the better your reputation becomes, the more people think about you, the more you're a connector, and frankly, the more gifts you can give. And why wouldn't you do that? I fundamentally believe it's a good thing to do.
So for a lot of people here on the call, some people might be pretty sure that they want to get on a board, but maybe the time right now isn't right? Like maybe they're thinking in the next 2, 3, 5 years. Well, should we be doing something today to ensure that we get on a board in 2, 3 years, or 5 years time? What can we be doing now to prepare?
The answer to that is yes, you should be doing something today. If it is your long-term objective to serve on a board, it's great that you know that. You know that that's what success looks like in 3 to 5 years. And preparing today is one of the best things that you can possibly do. And I think there are 3 very specific things you can do to help yourself in that. The first, not surprising, is to build your network, to talk to people who already serve on boards so you understand what that means. To potentially serve on a nonprofit board or a private board. Some of those may be easier to get to. I think that is worthwhile as well. So the network piece is something you should do immediately. And I'm a huge advocate of this. I tell this to young people. It is never too early to start to build your network. So that's step one. Step two, your career, where you're currently employed and what you're doing, is also a step ladder to your potential board readiness. And whether you're in finance or you're in marketing or even in, human capital, get to the top of the ladder as quickly as you can. Make sure that you're successful within your career, because people do want to put CFOs on boards. People do want to put people who are extremely experienced in digital transformation on their boards. People want to have human capital expertise of late, very importantly, I would say, on their boards. So make sure you do your career and do your work as well as you possibly can and continue to advance in your career. And then the third piece is develop other expertise. Make sure that you're continuing to learn and continuing to follow up on what's going on in the world. Because a portion of your value, you could divide that as you'd like, is your ability to understand what's happening today and how the competitive environment is changing, what the world is doing. And if there's a particular industry or area that you really enjoy or have an affinity for, go deep on that. Figure out who the experts are. Go to conferences related to that specific area. Perhaps do some angel investing. That's another way to really kind of get a feel for what's going on in the markets. So it's a continuous process of professional improvement, self-improvement, and building upon your network that will ultimately yield, what you would like to do in several years down the road. And again, mention to people, this is of interest to you. Join groups like, HerCsuite, HerCsuite. Make sure that you spend the time to learn about board work.
And it feels like it can be, depending on the size of the company and the type of company, like a publicly traded company, it can take time to get on one of those boards, and you need the experience on boards and things like that. Now, you left a very large firm, General Atlantic, after almost 30 years. How did you go about finding your board roles and some of the advisory positions that you have?
Honestly, the answer is through my network. And what may surprise people on this call, it's not necessarily from my first or second degree connections. It's sometimes from the most unusual connections. One specific advisory role I got from a former colleague of mine who I hadn't seen in 10 years and who happened to be at that firm. And so the relationships you develop today can have a huge impact on what happens 5-10 years down the road. Another one really resulted as a favor for a friend. Someone had called me and asked that I meet with her colleague. I spent time with this colleague as he was thinking through his job transition. We had a lovely conversation. 2 years later, he reaches out. He's in a role. He wants to introduce me to the CEO of the company where he's working, who's looking for an independent director. And he made the connection. And interestingly enough, and this is something that I did not predict or expect, the book I wrote actually had an impact on his view of me, on the fact that he knew that for his business, he needed to help his people be more proactive and network more often. And so that little aspect of what I had done was helpful to me in a way that I, again, didn't predict. Introduced to me by a person that I met to do a favor for 2 years ago. So you never know. I say yes when people ask you to meet somebody else. I say yes when you're asked to join a panel or a group. Say yes when somebody asks you to be a part of some organization that is of interest to you, even if it's a mentoring organization. I joined a female mentoring organization a couple of years back, and that's opened up interesting opportunities for me as well. And also be mindful of networking intergenerationally. I have found this to be an interesting insight that I hadn't expected, to be perfectly honest. But my network of millennials, 20 and 30 somethings, have opened up doors for me I hadn't expected. And then very similarly, there are people who are older than me who have also opened interesting doors for me. So it's not just people who are just like you or your peer group. Make sure you go a little bit more broad than that, because there's all sorts of things you learn and discover through that process. And different opportunities come to you as a result of their very different networks.
And earlier, Pat, you talked about how people hire board directors because they trust them, people that they like, right? People that they want to work with. So, building a network, and I talk about this all the time. It's not about meeting you once today and okay, right, well, I'll wait for Pat to call me, right, to get me on a board. It's not how it works, right? It's that consistency. It's building that trust. And sometimes that happens over years and years of knowing somebody and building that relationship. So that's great advice for everyone here on the call. And again, I'm going to ask a couple more questions here, but please feel free to post some questions in the chat and we'll jump on them as we finish. So you've served on lots of different boards. You've served on public, private, nonprofit. What do you find gratifying about serving on each individual type of board? I'm sure the experience is very different.
The experiences are very different. There's no question about it. I will say that public boards are more structured. They're more focused. They have committees. It is a different experience than I would say even a private board is. I think private boards allow you to problem solve in different ways. Private boards don't have the time frame of having to make sure that quarterly earnings are reported, that there's consistency associated with that. Certainly there are risk management issues, but it's different in a private company. You can think about long-term investments, infrastructure build for growth, and the various problems that a private company faces along the way. I personally love problem solving, so I really enjoy that process. And I love finding ways to really look at how do you continue to expand the marketplace, potentially how do you continue to acquire companies that might be useful and valuable as you continue to grow the business. So I actually especially like private companies. And then on the nonprofit side, I would say that my experience has been quite fascinating. I have found that a lot of nonprofits need to have a little bit more structure, and sometimes they go through various periods of evolution in their sophistication. And in one nonprofit that I served on for many years, I found what was most interesting was the evolution of the board itself and how you bring different people and how you help make that happen. And I would certainly say that I assisted in that process. I actually found several board directors for this particular nonprofit. How it changes the nature of the entire conversation depending on who's there, and how you can get people to collaborate in a more consistent way and to reach a direction in a faster way than if you have people who come to it from too many disparate ideas, and then it's not as productive. And so I think, that's an interesting way to proceed. And I will say on this nonprofit board, and for anyone here, I found one member, honestly, through a cold LinkedIn. But I think the email or the email that I sent to this individual intrigued her enough where she was willing to take a meeting. And we met and I introduced her to the executive founder. Her mission on the for-profit side was similar in a lot of ways to the nonprofit company. And it worked. And so I also think, again, in this, notion of giving gifts and introducing people, really think hard about that, because that's a wonderful way to be able to add value to others. And look, I would do it even if it didn't come back to me, but I will tell you, it does come back to you in ways you can't predict.
Now, you talked about the public, the private, the nonprofit. There's also advisory boards that I know you serve on as well. They're non-fiduciary boards. How are they different from serving on a board of directors?
I do have a number of advisory roles, and a couple of those are with earlier stage companies. Some of them are with a little bit larger companies. In one instance, it's very similar to a board type relationship, except that there aren't several others. So I kind of serve as that sounding board in essence. In another situation, there are several advisory directors and they gather together and opine on the various things that the company is facing over time. Um, I honestly, I think that they're just as interesting. They provide just as much opportunity to problem solve. Um, Personally, I find them to be attractive for so many ways because I have direct relationships with the people involved, and I feel like I can add value. And to me, that's very important. I think you have to understand yourself well enough to know what is it that you enjoy about this? What do you want to get out of it? Is it prestige? In my case, that's not necessarily a huge motivator for me. Is it problem solving and working with a company and having a relationship with someone where you have shared values and you enjoy being with them? That to me is a big motivator. And honestly, a recommendation I would give for anyone considering any board, do not take on the board unless you've met with every member. And my most recent opportunity, I was offered to be independent director, and honestly, the CEO and I hit it off terrifically, and he was very enthusiastic. And I did not commit until I met every single director, because that is my way of doing my homework. That is my way of making sure that the other individuals are people I want to spend time with. And I think time is your most precious resource. And only after that could I go back and say, yes, I would love to have this opportunity and I'm excited to join this board. And guess what? Everyone at that point already met me. And if there were any issues, at that early stage, you want to make sure that they come out sooner as opposed to later. And it's a board I'm extremely excited about and happy that I joined.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. We have a question here from Marilyn. She's asking about being a current independent consultant, and what is the value for a board, and how should they approach the board getting onto boards if they have come from an independent consulting background?
Look, it depends on what the area of expertise is for the consultant, but I would certainly leverage whatever that is. So if you have a deep background in, let's call it, energy and oil and gas, that's really valuable. Find those companies that really need that expertise. And having been an independent consultant would imply that you've had several clients and that you know what's going on in the industry. And so that's really important and valuable background to have. And if you have been an independent consultant, it is likely that you also have a network within that area. So again, what is the value that you bring? And I kind of like to do this in general. Put yourself on the other side of the table and say, why should that person hire you? Why should you get to be on that board? What are you going to bring that's really going to make a difference? And then make that case.
And then someone has asked here, do you have any stories about any failures that have happened on boards? And that's very general. So maybe you can go in any direction in terms of what a failure that has happened on a board.
Sure. I have a philosophy of life, and people may disagree with this, that there's no such thing as failure, only learning. If the question is much more, what have been some of the difficult challenges that people have to go through in boards, I will answer that. I think there are a lot of difficult things that can happen when you're a director of a company. In a public company, there can be huge earnings misses. There can be risks that you didn't project. There can be security or technology issues that are awkward and hard to deal with. There can be personnel issues, multiple personnel issues that are very hard. I will tell you, there is nothing harder than to have to change out a CEO. That is a really difficult procedure. And in my former company, and not surprisingly, any very large investor would have had to have done that a handful, hopefully not too many times. Those are hard situations, and you have to really bring a level of gravitas to that, thoughtfulness and mindfulness to that. I think, difficult things can occur when you join a board and you don't know the various personalities on the board. And there may be individuals who may have served very long or may have different perspectives and may not be adding value in the same way, and changes have to be made there. There are all sorts of board situations where change can be challenging. And a CEO looks to his or her board to help through those external challenges that you can't help. Your factory burned down, one of your operations is in the Ukraine. I mean, I can list many situations that are hard and challenging, and you have to go through it. But it is about learning. It is about, again, pattern recognition. Have you seen this before? Can you talk to somebody else who's been through something similar? Because that's usually tremendously helpful. First time going through anything is tough. If you've seen it before, you've done it before, by somebody who's gone through that, you're going to be able to manage that a whole lot better. And it becomes part of your experience base, for the next time and the next conversation.
A couple more questions here. Someone's asked about mentorship. Have you sort of, I don't know if people have formal mentors. I like to think that I've had mentors, but they probably didn't know they were, right? Like, how have you had somebody who has guided you through this process? Do you have people that you speak to about it?
Yes, I do. And I agree with you, Naomi. It's not necessarily someone I call my mentor,
Right.
but I have several mentors. I have people, like I said, who are older than me, who I look up to, who I ask questions of, who I observe. And honestly, I have people who are younger than me. And I know one young woman who, I'm particularly close to, and she calls me her friend-tor. She calls me her friend and her mentor. And honestly, I feel like she's a mentor to me too, because I'm learning from her as well. Life is about learning. That is my own personal philosophy. And, the more people you know, the more you can learn. And you have to really look at opportunities that are presented to you as ways to learn about yourself, to learn about the world, to learn about, those things that interest you.
And then someone's also asked about areas like digital transformation, cybersecurity, perhaps as well. Do they have applicability on boards? And does it depend on the industry, perhaps, this type of background?
Look, I think technology is pervasive, and honestly, I can't think of a single company that is not impacted by technology in some way. Any company that gathers information is subject to, cybersecurity risk and issues. So understanding technology and being conversant to the degree you can, I think, is very worthwhile, whether it's reading or attending events or talking to people, full stop. Similarly, digital transformation and the fact that, we are undergoing so much change is something that people have to have some idea of. And again, you don't have to go too far. You can read the article yesterday in the New York Times about the metaverse, which I did. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much here to know. The world is changing. What does it mean? How will it impact this company? Honestly, one of the most important things that you can do as a director, and I really think this is an insight I've gained with a lot of time, is ask the right questions. And go one level deeper than that first question. Go to the second and third question. And you have to make sure that you're knowledgeable enough to formulate the right questions, to lead a discussion to a place where you can find like important, actionable, wisdom and nuggets and advice for the CEO and for his or her management team.
Somebody has asked about roles on boards of mutual funds. What is this slightly different? Would you recommend a slightly different approach if someone were looking for a position on a board of a mutual fund?
Look, I would characterize a mutual fund as an investment firm or a financial services firm. If that is an area that you understand and is of interest to you, absolutely. But I do think you have to understand the whole sphere of investments and how a particular company fits with the rest of what is out there. What are some of the challenges for that company? How have they grown and evolved? mean, there are a whole host of questions, again, that one should ask themselves if that is of interest. You know, a mutual fund versus a healthcare firm versus an energy firm versus a consumer retail firm. Yes to all, depending on your interest, right? I mean, it depends on what's driving you, what your background is, to be able to make that match. If it's totally far afield from, you know, your background, you may have some relevance through functional expertise, but there has to be a story around it, right? You have to be able to convince someone else that you're the right person for this particular opportunity.
Okay, we've got time for one more question here. Maybe I'll try and wrap in a couple of them together. Yeah, so just thinking through, like, what, you know, if somebody's trying to identify a company that is right for them, and Paolo, your question, I think, is more about getting visibility. So we'll kind of wrap these up together. So let's say I'm trying to work out what kind of company I want to join the board of, and then I'm thinking through, how do I get that visibility? You know, what would be your advice for someone doing that? Is it worth really sitting down and looking at all the different types of firms and evaluating them, and then making a sort of approach, or what would you suggest?
Look, I think the first step is education to the degree that you can. I think it's good to have identified targets, so a handful of companies that are interesting to you for whatever that reason is, and I think you need to be able to articulate that. Then I think you actually have to take a look at who's serving on the board today. Take a look at their background. Take a look at what they have brought to the table. See if you're connected to any of those individuals, either first or second degree. If you are, try to have a conversation, reach out and say something to the effect of, it's a warm intro, you know somebody, would you spend a half hour with me? You're a director of this company board. It is my aspiration to join a board similar to this. I would love to learn about your experience. And, you know, depending on the individual, 9 times out of 10, if approached right and with the right warm introduction, you'll get that conversation. And I think that is a very important step. Tap your own network, first degree connections, see who they know who could be helpful in this search. Again, join a group, be where others are. Put yourself in the face, you know, in the path of those opportunities. And I think that is helpful. It's work. I mean, getting a board role takes a lot of work. Serving as a director also takes a lot of work. So be prepared for the work.
Well, thank you, Pat. I think just to sort of summarize here today, you know, we've heard networks are increasingly important in this area, knowing where you want to go. I've also got written down, make sure you have a plan, right, with what you want to do and when you want to get there and how you want to get there, and then really make it known to as many people as possible. You know, thank you for joining us, Pat. This has been a really insightful and just, again, great. The experience that you've had on boards and hiring board members is very unique here. So we appreciate you sharing that with us all.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I wish everybody good luck, and feel free to LinkedIn if you have any other questions.
Wonderful.
I want to thank both of you so much for being here today. We have a slide if people want to learn more about us, an easy QR code, and also a way to reach out to Naomi Kent. And I'm so grateful. And I want to just say also, because Pat has made introductions for me that have led to very interesting conversations and meant so much. So thank you, Pat, for the introductions that you have made for me and for the opportunity to have you here today with us. And I hope that we will stay connected in the world with all of you. We appreciate you. Thank you for coming today. Keep shining your light out on the world and making an impact. And thank you for being here. And thank you both to Naomi and Pat for an amazing conversation. Thank you so much.